Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The ocean, where the lost come back to play. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Return to the Coast. The wind cut sharply against Sarah's face as she stepped out of the car, her fingers trembling as they fumbled with the keys to her childhood home. The small coastal town lay quiet before her, a distant echo of summers long gone. The air tasted of salt and damp wood, heavy with the familiar, suffocating scent of the ocean. It was colder than she remembered, more desolate. Sarah hadn't been back in years. She never meant to return at all, not after what happened. Yet, here she was, staring at the same narrow street that led down to the beach. Even now, she could hear the faint crashing of the waves, rhythmic and unyielding, as if the ocean itself had been waiting for her. Always waiting. The house creaked under her touch as she unlocked the door. Stepping inside, she was greeted by the hollow silence of a place long abandoned. Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through the fog-covered windows. A familiar chill settled into her bones. Her brother's face flashed in her mind. Daniel, the boy she'd lost to the sea on a stormy evening, swept away before she could do anything to stop it. She clenched her jaw, forcing the memory down. But the guilt gnawed at her just as it had every day since. That night, after unpacking the few belongings she brought, Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the thick fog that clung to the shore. The beach was empty, but there was something unsettling about its stillness, as if the ocean itself was hiding something just below the surface. She shut her eyes and leaned her head back, trying to block it out, but sleep wouldn't come. Then she heard it. A sound, soft, distant, but unmistakable. Laughter, childish and carefree, it floated on the wind like a song carried from far away. Her heart stilled. No one played on the beach anymore, especially at this hour. She rose slowly, stepping toward the window. There was nothing but dark water stretching endlessly. Yet she could swear, beneath the rolling fog, someone was out there. That night, her dreams were filled with Daniel. His small figure stood at the water's edge, his arm outstretched, calling her to follow him into the waves. Chapter 2. The First Glimpse of the Lost. Sarah woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains, her body tense, her mind still tangled in the remnants of her dream. Daniel, she could still see him, standing at the water's edge, his arm reaching toward her, beckoning. The image clung to her like sea mist, making it hard to shake the sense that something wasn't right. She couldn't remember when she had fallen asleep or how long she had been standing at the window the night before. With a sigh, she pulled on a sweater and ventured outside. The town felt deserted, as if time had passed without it noticing. A few familiar faces passed her on the narrow streets, old men in fishing hats, women walking dogs, but their glances were quick, suspicious even, and they said nothing beyond a nod. No one asked how long she planned to stay. No one mentioned Daniel. The silence weighed heavily on her. The town had always been like this, as if everyone had quietly agreed to never speak of the tragedies the ocean took. She stopped by the local market for coffee, where the cashier, a woman Sarah faintly remembered from childhood, offered a tight-lipped smile. "Back for a visit?" she asked, avoiding Sarah's eyes. Sarah nodded, but the words wouldn't come. She left with her coffee, the woman's eyes burning into her back as she exited. As she walked back to the house, a chill crawled down her spine. Something was off. When she reached the porch, her breath caught in her throat. There, on the worn wooden steps, lay a small plastic truck. Daniel's truck. She knew it was his. The bright red paint chipped at the corners, a sticker peeling on one side. It was impossible. She hadn't seen this toy in over a decade. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Slowly, she walked inside. That's when she noticed the seashells. They were scattered across the windowsill in a neat, deliberate line, seashells she hadn't seen before, but they felt eerily familiar. That night, Sarah returned to the beach, drawn once again by the sound of distant laughter. The tide lapped gently at the shore, but in the fog, she saw them, figures, small and indistinct, playing at the water's edge. As she approached, they vanished, leaving only wet footprints in the sand. One of the children looked just like Daniel. Chapter 3: The Pull of the Ocean. The wet footprints still lingered in Sarah's mind as she tossed in bed that night, trying to make sense of what she had seen. The distant laughter, the vanishing figures, the child who looked so much like Daniel, it was impossible. But when she closed her eyes, it all came rushing back. She could still feel the cold sand beneath her feet, the pull of the ocean's tide as it gently beckoned her closer. Her dreams that night were worse. Daniel was there again, but this time he was drenched, water dripping from his hair and clothes. He stood outside her window, knocking softly. "Come play with me, Sarah," his voice whispered through the glass, muffled yet clear. "Come to the water." Sarah jolted awake, her heart pounding. Her room was dark, the curtains fluttering in a breeze she couldn't feel. She stared at the window, half expecting to see Daniel standing there, his small hand pressed against the glass. But the night was still, and she was alone. She wasn't sure anymore if it was just a nightmare or something worse. The next morning, she visited the town doctor, hoping for answers. Dr. Harris was kind, but firm. "You're dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma," he said, his pen tapping lightly against his clipboard. "It's natural for your mind to project those memories, especially in a place that holds so much pain. What you're seeing, it's not real, Sarah." But Sarah wasn't so sure. The things she had seen, the sounds she had heard, it all felt too real to be just in her head. Later that day, she wandered down to the docks, lost in thought. An old fisherman, his skin leathery from years under the sun, caught her eye. He was watching her closely, a knowing look in his eyes. "You're Daniel's sister, ain't ya?" he asked, voice raspy. Sarah nodded. "The ocean took him," the fisherman muttered, his gaze turning to the water. "But sometimes it gives them back. Not the way they were, though. They're different. The lost come back to play, but their games ain't ones you want to join." That night, Sarah found herself back on the beach, her feet sinking into the wet sand, the surf lapping at her ankles. She wasn't sure how she had gotten there. The water seemed to pull at her, urging her closer. Before she knew it, she was waist deep, the cold biting at her skin, her heart racing. The ocean, it seemed, wasn't finished with her. Chapter 4: The Past Resurfaces. Sarah barely remembered how she made it back to the house that night. The ocean had swallowed her up, pulling at her, calling her, and it had taken every ounce of her strength to break away from its grasp. Cold had sunk deep into her bones, but something darker, something more terrifying, had taken hold of her mind. Daniel. His name echoed in her thoughts as she stood shivering in the doorway of her childhood home, her clothes still damp from the sea. The fisherman's words circled back to her, the lost come back to play, but their games aren't ones you want to join. Was Daniel one of the lost now? Had he truly come back? Her guilt, the one thing she could never fully shake, rose to the surface like the tide creeping in. It always started the same way the day he disappeared. They'd been playing on the beach, laughing, running through the surf. She'd promised their mother she'd watch him, but she'd gotten distracted, her gaze pulled to the horizon as a storm rolled in. By the time she turned back, Daniel was gone, the waves already pulling him under. She'd screamed for him, ran into the freezing water until it dragged her down too, but she'd been too late. The ocean had taken him. She had never forgiven herself. And now, it seemed the sea hadn't forgiven her either. That night, she awoke to the sound of water dripping. Drip, drip, drip. She sat up, her heart pounding. The sound was coming from downstairs. Sarah crept toward the noise, every step heavier than the last. At the bottom of the stairs, her breath caught. Wet footprints, small, child-sized, led from the front door to the living room, vanishing near the window. And then she heard it. Daniel's voice, distant yet playful, carried on the wind. "Sarah, come outside." Her heart raced. She moved toward the door, hand trembling as she reached for the knob, but something held her back. The house was empty. It had to be. But the footprints, how could they be real? The next morning, whispers spread through town. Another child had gone missing. A boy, only 8 years old, had been last seen playing by the shore. The sea had claimed him, just as it had claimed Daniel all those years ago. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps. Was Daniel responsible for these disappearances? Or was the ocean merely repeating the past, taking what it wanted piece by piece? Chapter 5. The games begin. Sarah stood at the edge of the beach, the moonlight casting long shadows across the sand. The ocean stretched before her, dark and restless, but it was the voices that pulled her in. Faint, like echoes from another world, they rose above the crashing waves. "Come play with us, Sarah," they whispered, soft yet insistent. Among them, she recognized Daniel's voice. Her feet moved before she could stop them, carrying her down the familiar path to the shore. She knew she shouldn't be here, knew the danger that lurked beneath the surface, but the pull was too strong. The sound of children laughing, innocent, playful, cut through the fog as she neared the water's edge. And there they were, the lost. The children stood in a loose circle, their figures pale and glowing under the moon's light. Daniel was among them, his small face lit with a strange joy. He waved to her, beckoning her closer. "Come play, Sarah," he called, just like in her dreams. Her heart thudded in her chest, torn between fear and longing. She needed to see him again, to touch him, to know he was real. Without thinking, she stepped into the circle, her feet sinking into the wet sand. The children's faces brightened with excitement, their hands reaching out to pull her in. They began to play. At first, it seemed harmless enough, just a game of tag, children darting through the mist, laughter echoing across the beach. Sarah followed, her mind foggy, her body moving as if in a trance. Daniel ran ahead, always just out of reach, his laughter ringing in her ears. But as the game wore on, something shifted. The children's laughter grew sharper, more distorted. She tried to leave, to pull away, but her legs wouldn't obey. The sand beneath her feet seemed to grab hold, dragging her down. The children's eyes glinted with a dark amusement as they circled her, their voices growing louder, more insistent. "You can't leave, Sarah. The game isn't over." Panic surged through her. She struggled, but it was as if the ocean itself had latched onto her, pulling her deeper into the circle, toward the water. The waves lapped at her ankles, rising higher with every passing second. Just as the tide was about to swallow her, rough hands grabbed her shoulders, yanking her back. She gasped, the spell breaking as she was dragged from the water's grip. The old fisherman stood over her, his face etched with fear. "Once you play their games, they won't let you go," he warned, his voice low and trembling. "The ocean wants you back." Chapter 6. Descent into Madness. Sarah sat in the old armchair by the window, staring out at the waves crashing against the shore. The ocean was always there, looming, its presence suffocating. The laughter was constant now, faint but persistent, no matter where she went. It followed her home, echoing down the hallways, creeping into the corners of her mind. She barely left the house anymore. When she did, the townspeople avoided her, their wary eyes following her every step. They whispered behind her back, and Sarah couldn't blame them. She had seen the way they looked at her like she was crazy. Maybe she was. After all, who else was haunted by the laughter of dead children? The dreams were worse. Every night, Daniel was there, soaked to the bone, his small hand pressed against her window, his voice soft but insistent. "Come to the water, Sarah." She would wake with the salty taste of sea air in her mouth, her sheets damp and cold as if the ocean had come to her. Sometimes, when she opened her eyes, she could still see the wet footprints on the floor. But it wasn't just the dreams anymore. The lines between what was real and what was in her mind blurred until she could no longer tell the difference. She would catch glimpses of the lost children out of the corner of her eye, just for a moment, but they were always there. Watching, waiting. The ocean's pull grew stronger. Every time she went outside, she found herself drawn back to the beach, her feet carrying her toward the water without her consent. She would stand at the shoreline, her toes buried in the wet sand, the sound of the waves filling her ears like a lullaby. And always, always, there was the laughter. It was no longer distant. It was inside her head, relentless and mocking. She couldn't escape it. Something snapped in Sarah's mind. She realized that the only way to end this was to confront it. The ocean had taken Daniel, had taken others, and now it was trying to take her. If she didn't face it, she would lose herself entirely. But to face the ocean meant facing her past, and the guilt that had gnawed at her for years. Sarah stood, her decision made. She would return to the shore alone, just as she had been the day Daniel disappeared. She would face the lost, the ocean, and whatever was waiting for her beneath the waves. There was no running from it anymore. Chapter 7. Into the Depths. The night was thick with fog as Sarah approached the beach, the familiar sound of waves crashing against the shore echoing in her ears. It felt like a siren's call, pulling her closer, urging her to surrender. This was it, her last chance to confront the darkness that had consumed her life. As she stepped onto the sand, she saw them waiting. The lost. Daniel was at the forefront, his face glowing eerily in the moonlight, eyes bright with a haunting mix of joy and sorrow. Around him were other children, their laughter filling the air like a twisted melody. But this time, it wasn't just a game. This time, they wanted her to join them. "Come play with us, Sarah," Daniel called, his voice sweet but laced with an undercurrent of something sinister. The others echoed him, their innocent faces twisted in anticipation. They danced just out of reach, beckoning her closer as the ocean rolled in, its dark waters shimmering under the moonlight. Sarah's heart raced, fear and longing battling within her. The temptation to run into Daniel's arms was overwhelming, but she hesitated, remembering the fisherman's warning. The ocean didn't just take people, it created twisted versions of them, trapped between life and death. Could she really trust what she saw? "Join us," Daniel pleaded, stepping forward, his arms outstretched. "We can be together again." But the laughter of the other children shifted, darkening into a cacophony that sent chills down her spine. Sarah knew she had to make a choice, surrender herself to the ocean, and join Daniel and the others, or break free from their grasp and face the truth of her past. As she fought, the rising tide of grief and desire, a memory flashed in her mind the stormy evening when everything changed. She had been distracted, letting her guard down while Daniel played at the water's edge. If she had just paid attention, he might still be alive. Suddenly, the ocean roared louder, as if it could sense her hesitation. You can't escape your fate, Sarah. Daniel's voice echoed, morphing into something darker. You let me drown. Panic surged through her. The realization crashed over her like a wave. Daniel's death wasn't just an accident. Her negligence had played a part in it. The ocean had been punishing her all along. As the water swirled around her, Sarah took a deep breath, determination settling in her chest. She wouldn't let the ocean claim her. Not now, not ever. With every ounce of strength, she turned away from Daniel, from the laughter, and ran back to the shore, her heart pounding against her ribcage, ready to fight for her freedom. Chapter 8. The Escape or the Fall. The ocean roared, its waves crashing violently against the shore, pulling at Sarah with relentless force. She could feel the water swirling around her ankles, slick and cold, the cries of the lost echoing in her ears. It was now or never. She had to fight. Sarah dug her heels into the sand, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she struggled against the tide. "No!" she screamed, her voice nearly lost in the chaos. The shadows of the lost surrounded her, their small hands reaching out, trying to pull her under. But she wouldn't let them win. Not this time. "Join us, Sarah." Daniel's voice rang out, sweet yet haunting. He stood just beyond the surf, his expression a mix of desperation and longing. "You don't have to fight anymore. We can be together. Just come to me." Tears streamed down her face as she faced him one last time. The boy she had loved so fiercely now embodied the guilt that had consumed her for years. The boy who had vanished, lost to the depths of the ocean because of her negligence. "Daniel," she whispered, the name catching in her throat. She felt the weight of her choices, the pain of her guilt threatening to drown her. But in that moment, something inside her ignited. I can't let you take me." With every ounce of strength, she pulled away from the grasp of the waves. Memories flooded her mind, the laughter, the summer days spent building sandcastles, the love she felt for her little brother. She realized now that holding on to her guilt was a way of keeping him alive. But it was time to let go. "No!" she shouted, a fierce determination surging through her. "I choose to live." The waves roared in fury as she tore herself free from their clutches, pushing back against the lost children with everything she had. Daniel's face twisted, his features a mask of sorrow as he reached out. But Sarah took a step back, breathing in the salt air with clarity. With one final surge, she turned and sprinted up the beach, away from the shadows of the past. The ocean writhed behind her, angry and relentless, but she was free, finally breaking the bond that had tied her to the past. As she reached the safety of solid ground, the weight of the ocean's pull lessened. She looked back, the water crashing behind her, and felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The laughter of the lost faded, replaced by the distant calls of gulls soaring above. In that moment, Sarah understood. The ocean would always be there, waiting, but she was no longer its prisoner. She had chosen life, chosen to embrace her future, even if it meant carrying the memories of Daniel with her. But as she turned to walk away, a soft giggle echoed behind her, and a small figure appeared at the water's edge. Another lost child, waiting for the next soul the ocean would claim.